A 30-day proposed ceasefire has been put out between Russia and Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy said he would agree to meet Kremlin leader Vladimir Putin in Turkey on Thursday after US President Donald Trump told him immediately to accept Putin's proposal of direct talks. SABC's correspondent in Moscow, Dasha Chernyshova, is standing by to give us more. Dasha, a very good morning to you, and I think a lot of hopes resting on this one, but there seems to be a bit of reservation from the Ukrainian side. Talk to us. What's actually happening?
Well, we have seen the Russian president proposing to hold negotiations, direct and unconditional talks with Kiev to take place on the 15th of May in Istanbul. In response to that, there's been the demand of the ceasefire from the Ukrainian side, that ceasefire that would last for 30 days. And President of the United States, Donald Trump, saying that Ukraine should start those talks. And then Zelenskyy, in response, said that he will be coming to Istanbul himself and he would be waiting for the Russian president. No response from the Russian side to that proposal so far, but for many in Moscow it is quite obvious that the Russian president would not likely be going to Istanbul for the talks with Vladimir Zelenskyy, because the Ukrainian settlement is much more complex issue than just putting one signature on one document, and a lot of preparatory work has to be done before the two leaders can actually meet face to face. It's not that the Kremlin would be ruling out the possibility of such a meeting, but they would insist that there has to be the groundwork prepared before this meeting is actually taking place. Now, what we are hearing from the Russian side is that Moscow is ready for the negotiations with Ukraine based on what has already been worked on. They want to build on the document that they have agreed upon back in March 2022, that is 3 years ago already, and then to take into account the realities on the ground, with Russia insisting that it has the upper hand on the battlefield, and that from the Russian perspective would be a very good solution or basis to find a negotiated solution to this conflict in Ukraine. But also Moscow is saying that they hope the Western powers, particularly the United States, will use their pressure over Kiev to make sure that they start those talks. Again, at what level Russia will be represented is quite unclear. Zelenskyy said he is ready to be there himself.
We talk about the ceasefire, that 30-day ceasefire. Where are we on this one? Because this is what I think a lot of people are waiting to hear, whether it's going to happen or not. Has there been any signs that it is slowing down, or is it still carrying on unabated?
Well, we have seen several ceasefires already. President Vladimir Putin has also addressed this issue, saying that there were 3 cases of ceasefire most recently. The first one, the moratorium on the strikes against energy facilities, that was introduced on the 18th of March following the conversation Putin had with US colleague Donald Trump. And that ceasefire lasted for a month. Moscow says Ukraine has breached it numerously. Then there was this Easter truce that Moscow has unilaterally proposed and called on Ukraine to adhere as well. Moscow says Ukraine has been violating that numerous times as well. And then there was this Victory Day ceasefire that Moscow has introduced unilaterally for the course of the 3 days. Again, Moscow saying that Ukraine had not even provided any sort of proper response to that proposal. And that drives Moscow to conclude that Kiev is trying to evade the negotiations. So from the Russian perspective, it is counter-efficient to introduce a ceasefire before the talks start, but that does seem to be a sticking point for the Ukrainian side. They insist on the completely different sequence. They would like to see the ceasefire first and then the negotiations. Russia, meanwhile, also reminds that it has the experience of imposing ceasefire during the negotiations that have been disrupted and that have never led to any sort of negotiated solution and resulted in this conflict lasting for more than 3 years now.
Right, we'll leave it there. Dasha, we wait to hear what's going on. First time since March 2022 when there were those direct negotiations that were held in Istanbul. So now we wait to find out if this will once again happen this coming week on Thursday. That's Dasha Chernyshova is giving us an update from Moscow.